Hello and welcome again. I spoke last time of the illusion of democracy demonstrated by presenting two apparently differing political ideologies at the times appointed for elections. Hopefully, all will have noticed on the video cover the third figure standing behind the two politicians haranguing the tremulous crowd. The two front figures, as described in Larkin Rose's linked video to that, strive to each instill fear into the voters as to their prospective fate if their opponent is elected. The important point is that whichever side gets into power is irrelevant. They are both fronts for the one or ones behind the scenes who are in real control and issue the directives which determine the economic, political and social outcomes for the nominated future until the next election. Until people realise this and develop and exhibit the courage to act accordingly and refuse to participate in these charades, the situation is only going to slowly deteriorate to the point where society becomes ultimately chaotic, with the resultant deaths of millions or billions of people. In the comments box are links to extremely important documentaries, probably the most important many will ever see, which explains how this current situation has evolved. The first three links are to the same video because sometimes there is uncertainty as to how this one can be located, for reasons that will become obvious once one is able to access it. The fourth link is less problematic, it being of a more generic nature. However, the themes are closely related and run basically chronologically, covering the topic of elites controlling the money supply and hence society in general over the past several centuries. I would recommend starting with the Money Masters and then proceeding onto the Connolly video and onto the Will Keat videos after that. These are both monumental works of research, and in each case, in the case of the one entitled Everything is a Rich Man's Trick, a work of great personal courage. They are lengthy and will perhaps have to be taken in over a number of sessions. But if one is offered the chance to see these and refuses to invest the time or effort needed, one should ponder what sort of commitment one has to the concept of discerning truth or manifesting honesty and integrity in one's own life. And following on from that, what quality of life is one entitled to expect in the absence of these principles? There are some points in Connolly's video which raise questions, some of which are alluded to in the comments available from the Top Documentary Films link, and people are encouraged to look into these for themselves. Any such works as these will necessarily contain some element of human frailty or error, but as always, whenever the full facts may not be available, we must fall back to proven principles of morality to guide our actions. This series of my videos over the span of almost 3 years now has been about the concepts of natural law and true justice, and how these are upheld by the existence in living rather than simply abstract form by Magna Carta 1215. Those principles exist irrespective of whether Magna Carta was ever written or not, but it is of inestimable value that it was, and exists in English or British law as an irrevocable restraint upon those charged with administering the realm. At the end of the Connolly film, he states that Queen Elizabeth II cannot be prosecuted as the Crown, which he mistakenly equates with her person, owns the courts. He is only partly right. The Crown does not consist of the monarch, who as a personage merely represents the authority vested in the highest iteration of the concept of justice in the British system. As such, the Crown is wholly outside the authority of the office bearer. As the court system currently in existence, however, is a creation of succeeding monarchs and their henchmen, it is correct to say that the monarch owns the courts, operating as they do as a fake concoction of illusory justice. Of course, Queen Elizabeth could be prosecuted by a jury of her peers, the barons, as outlined in Article 61, and stripped from office, at least temporarily, which happened, as mentioned many times, on March the 23rd, 2001. She remained ostensibly in office only in the minds of those who either remained nescient or chose to become ignorant of that event, solely because of the criminal cooperation of traitors in high office and the treasonous actions of the police forces, who ignored their constables' oaths and refused to arrest said criminals, including their own commanding officers. But to those who understand and follow the law, she ceased from that date to the end of her life to be the monarch in truth, and thus was lawfully prosecuted. Her sentence was not carried out because of the failure of the public to acknowledge the law, but the verdict was just. The point I wish to make with these links is to illustrate the motivations and methods employed by the money masters and those possessing the vast fortunes which became accessible to individuals under the almost free market system of capitalism which arose in the United States of America after the War of Independence. Watching these videos should make a thoughtful viewer ponder many questions concerning what we have been taught as history. One such might be, for example, was the War of Independence what we have been taught it was? What if the men who controlled the world's money supply in Europe in the 18th century, the Rothschilds, understood the principles of laissez-faire economics better than the kings and potentates of their time, and fomented and aided the colonists in their desire for freedom from crown oppression, knowing that free men and women are greatly more productive than slaves, and that such a vast land, if given into the hands of free men, might produce unimaginably greater wealth than already existed in Europe. Such goals would have been in opposition to the wishes of King George III and also the French monarchy. But the financiers operate on longer thought lines than venal and potentially inbred aristocrats. Financiers have a method for reclaiming loans from incompetent or recalcitrant monarchs or governments who are reluctant or unable to repay, and that is simply to fund an opposing regime to bring their debtors to heel. Once we grasp fully the concept that those who control the money supply always fund both sides in any military conflict, thus ensuring maximum profits no matter who wins, suddenly the world takes on a different hue when considering many of history's imponderable questions. It becomes necessary to consider independently from whatever we might have been told, what are the true motives of those pulling the strings of world politics? How much control do ultra-rich billionaires have over the politicians who make the rules governing the activities of everyday folk? While the average individual, earning perhaps in today's terms $100,000 per annum, might look in envy upon the politician getting paid $250,000 to $300,000 or more with their lavish pension schemes and business class travel allowances, those types are easily persuaded by offers of as little as $1 million or $2 million in cash or other assets, or the promise of a well-paid corporate job, to facilitate the passage of legislation favourable to the billionaire's already bloated accounts. Such inducements are mere small change to the plutocrat. As stated by Ayn Rand's fictional character John Galt almost 70 years ago, it's by such pennies and smiles that your politicians are bought. It puts one in mind of the old joke about the woman who decided to resort to prostitution to raise urgently needed cash, asked at the end of the day how much she'd raised, and stating a modest sum of $1.50, then being asked, who gave you the 50 cents? Replied, they all did. Our politicians are basically immoral people who sell their souls for a pittance and believe in slavery. It's impossible to support the concept of taxation on any level without supporting the concept of slavery. Taxation means that a predetermined portion of one's working life is spent supporting the motivations and goals of someone else. Anyone not possessing choice in that matter is enduring slavery for that time, and slavery is the condition underlying their life. The fact that so many support the concept of coercive taxation as a means of funding public services instead of freedom from excessive taxation and the voluntary contribution to charity or insurance safeguards surely fills the minds of the money masters and the power mongers with glee. But while it's easy to point the finger at politicians and those with a high public profile, it's vital to recognise our own role in the society we've helped create. Because that's right, we've all played our part. These criminals are lording it over everyone else because too few people are willing to even raise their voices against the tyranny and lawlessness of those who have usurped power. Listen to the discussion with Will Keat and Ben Rubin to see that we cannot have a free society unless people are willing to stand up for truth. It's not as if by abdicating this responsibility that we can hope to have a stable society where we exist with a hopefully tolerable level of slavery and tyranny. We are, as in all things in life, either moving forwards towards a goal or sliding backwards towards chaos and disorganisation. The universe doesn't permit us to stand still because it doesn't stand still, and we're a part of it, aren't we? We're deluding ourselves if we think that somehow we can enter a state of stasis while everything revolves and evolves around us and we remain unaffected. My final message for this year is to watch and learn something from the links provided. Some may not agree with every point, as I've already illustrated from my own point of view, but at least open our minds and try to grasp more of the picture than what we're told by the media, which is controlled by the plutocrats. Think about it. Isn't it likely that if someone owns a mass media outlet, they're likely to try to persuade people to points of view which maintain or increase the advantages they already possess over those less powerful? Whatever we are told must be subjected to the most rigorous questioning we can muster, and if demonstrably false, must be opposed, at least verbally. One of the things we're told is that we have a legal government and that some people thus have extra privileges to order about and coerce others. We know from our study of the Constitution that this simply isn't so. It's entirely false. And this must be given utterance by millions more people than is currently the case. If only a few have the courage to speak up and to try to oppose this tyranny, it's easier for those exercising unrighteous dominion to harass and silence those few. But if millions, or even only 10 to 20%, speak out and refuse to comply, the situation of the criminals becomes untenable. Trying to imprison or dispossess such a large proportion of the population just wouldn't be possible without either making the economy unworkable or arousing such an uproar that it couldn't be silenced. My thanks to everyone for your support and best wishes to everyone for a happy festive season and an auspicious start to the new year. Thank you for watching.